Most women never notice the exact moment it happens. They sense it, perhaps, like the way the air feels heavier before a storm, but they cannot name it. One day, the man they once tried to read like scripture no longer seeks their understanding. His silences are no longer invitations to probe, they are fortresses. His eyes stop scanning for recognition in theirs, and the energy they once felt circling outward from him, eager to explain, to defend, to be known, turns inward, disappearing into a stillness that is his alone. This is not bitterness. It is not withdrawal in the way wounded men retreat to lick their pride. No, this is the quiet of a man who has stepped beyond the need for mirrors. He no longer searches for his reflection in another's perception. The judgments, the misunderstandings, the shallow readings of his soul, they fall from him like rain on stone. This is not arrogance, though it may be mistaken for it. It is the dignity of one who has understood that truth does not require witnesses. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." A man who outgrows the need to be understood has walked that path. He has learned, through the agony of being misread, that people do not see reality. They see projections. They see the shadows of their own insecurities cast upon the walls of others. And when a man stands still long enough to observe this dance of projection, he realizes that fighting to be seen clearly is like trying to hold smoke. You may have met such a man and felt an unsettling calm in him. Not the passivity of surrender, but the immovability of a mountain that has survived centuries of storms. You could hurl accusations, twist his words, misinterpret his intentions, and though he might speak, it is not to win your approval. His speech has no hooks. His truth is no longer a weapon. It is simply there, like a stone in your hand, solid, indifferent to whether you value it or not. Some would call this detachment, but the word is too cold to capture its heat. It is more akin to the fire of self-possession, the kind that consumes every craving for external validation. Jung would say this man has integrated a part of his shadow, the part that once feared being unseen. He has sat in the discomfort of isolation, felt the sting of false judgment, and discovered that his worth is not diminished by another's inability to comprehend it. You too may feel the pull toward this place, away from the exhausting theater of constant explanation. Have you not grown weary of offering your heart like an open book, only to watch others skim the pages, searching for lines that confirm their biases? There comes a time when you understand. The one who misunderstands you is often protecting a fragile illusion. To dismantle it would be to dismantle their entire sense of self. And so they will not listen, not because you are wrong, but because the truth would demand they change. This man has stopped demanding. He lets them believe what they must. He does not correct the stories whispered about him. He does not plead his case, for he knows that the truth, unpolished and unapologetic, will reveal itself in time, or not at all. And he has made peace with both outcomes. There is a liberation in this. To no longer be the defendant in the court of public opinion is to reclaim one's life force. To stop rehearsing speeches for an audience that will not hear them is to redirect that energy inward, into building, into creating, into being. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." How much of your suffering has been born of imagining how others see you? How much energy have you bled into crafting an image for minds that were never looking? When a man abandons the hunger to be understood, he becomes dangerous, not in violence, but in freedom. The chains that once tethered him to the approval of others dissolve, and he moves without seeking permission. His compass is internal, immune to the shifting winds of opinion. He is not reckless, but he will not be swayed by the noise. You may accuse him of pride, but pride depends on being seen. This is sovereignty. It is why his presence unsettles those still bound by the need to explain themselves. They feel his lack of dependence on their comprehension as a kind of loss, where once they could pull at his heartstrings by misunderstanding him. Now, there is nothing to grip. He listens without grasping. He answers without defending. And in this way, he forces them, without ever trying, to confront their own craving for control over the narrative. But make no mistake, this transformation is not born in light. It is forged in the dark corridors of solitude, where a man must face the unbearable truth that not everyone will meet him where he stands. He must bury the boy who sought approval in every glance, who bent himself into shapes to be liked, who mistook being understood for being loved. Only then can the man rise, stripped of that old desperation, carrying a calm that no misunderstanding can break. There is a subtle grief in that rising, though few will name it. For to outgrow the need to be understood is to let die an old intimacy with the world, a belief that others could hold you in their gaze without distortion. That boyhood faith, naive and luminous, believed that truth spoke for itself, that purity of intent guaranteed clarity of reception. But the man knows otherwise. He has seen how easily words are twisted by the fears of the listener, how even silence can be painted in the colors of another's suspicion. He does not abandon connection. He abandons dependency. This is a distinction only the mature will grasp. The immature hear detachment and think of cold withdrawal, but he understands that stepping back from the compulsion to be understood is an act of mercy, for himself and for others. Mercy, because he no longer demands that they dismantle the scaffolding of their inner world to accommodate his truth. Mercy, because he refuses to push them toward revelations they are not ready to bear. In the language of Jung, this is a man who has met his shadow and welcomed it into the council of his being. He has faced the part of himself that wanted to be liked at any cost, the part that feared exile so deeply it would play roles it despised. And rather than banish this shadow into denial, he brought it into the fire of consciousness. In that heat, the shadow was not destroyed, but transformed, its fear reforged into discernment, its need for approval distilled into self-knowledge. Imagine such a man standing in the presence of those who misunderstand him. There is no frantic flutter in his voice, no scrambling to edit himself into something more palatable. He knows that to edit himself for them would be to betray the very thing worth knowing. He understands what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." The rest, whether they comprehend, applaud, or condemn, is outside his governance. For many, this is an unbearable stance. To them, worth is a mirror. They only know they exist when reflected in the eyes of others. Such people cannot imagine moving through life without a constant feedback loop of validation and correction. But the man who has stepped beyond that loop is not starved by its absence. He is fed by his own table. His sense of identity no longer hangs on the trembling thread of perception. You may recognize in this man the archetype of the hermit, not the recluse hiding from the world, but the sage who walks among others while carrying a self-contained light. His solitude is not measured in physical distance, but in the space between his core and the clamoring needs of those who wish to shape him. He offers his presence freely, yet keeps his essence inviolate. This transformation, however, comes at a cost. The man must endure being labeled aloof, arrogant, or uncaring. Those who once thrived on his explanations will accuse him of withholding. They will interpret his silence as judgment, his self-possession as superiority, and he will let them. For he has learned the futility of handing truth to those who have no hands to hold it. In the world of modern psychology, this shift could be seen as the collapse of a trauma bond with society itself. From childhood, many are conditioned to equate love with being understood, to seek in others the confirmation that they are worthy of existing as they are. The man who outgrows this conditioning must break that bond, not in anger, but in clarity. He no longer bargains for his right to be as he is. He simply is. You may feel the temptation to join him in this freedom, but beware. It will strip from you more than the desire to be understood. It will also strip away the excuses you once clung to. Without the constant noise of defending yourself, you will be left alone with the raw, unmediated truth of who you are. There will be no scapegoat, no, "they didn't understand me," to hide behind. Only you, in the unflinching mirror of your own awareness. This is why so few walk this path. It requires a strength that is not loud, but relentless. The strength to be misread and remain unmoved. The strength to be called selfish and remain generous. The strength to love without needing that love, to be recognized in the form you wish. In the words of Epictetus, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. And here lies the paradox. In giving up the need to be understood, the man becomes more deeply understood by those rare souls who can truly see. They recognize in his stillness the mark of one who has wrestled with himself and won, not the victory of conquest, but of surrender to what is unchangeable. And in that recognition, no words are needed at all. There is a strange magnetism to a man like this. He does not advertise his strength, yet people feel it before he speaks. It is not the aggressive charge of dominance that rattles a room, but a steady pulse, like the slow, assured beat of a drum that has been sounding long before you arrived and will go on long after you leave. Those who live in noise will at first find it disorienting. They will search for cracks in his calm, places to insert their chaos, but they will find none. The man who no longer needs to be understood has stepped into what could be called an archetypal father energy, not in the literal sense, but in the deep symbolic sense. He becomes the pillar in the storm, the grounded axis around which others unconsciously orient. Jungian thought would say he embodies the self, the integrated center that is neither enslaved to the ego nor lost in the unconscious. From this center, his actions flow with quiet inevitability, unmoved by the tremors of opinion. This makes him immune to the bait of conflict. He knows the oldest trap is the provocation to prove oneself. The world will try to pull him into that old dance, where every misinterpretation demands a rebuttal, every insult demands a defense. But he no longer dances on command. He chooses his words like a sculptor choosing his strokes, not to please the crowd, but to reveal form from stone. If the form is not recognized, so be it. The stone is still the stone. And yet, this man is not unfeeling. That is the misconception. He feels deeply, perhaps more deeply than most, but his feelings are no longer tyrants that drag him toward explanation. They are quiet guests in the house of his mind, each acknowledged, none allowed to overturn the table. He understands, in the way Marcus Aurelius did, that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. There is also love in him, love that has matured beyond the adolescent need to be validated in return. This love does not waste itself trying to prove its purity to those who have already decided its worth. It simply radiates, like a sun unconcerned whether the blind can see it. To those who are ready, it is warmth. To those who are not, it is nothing at all. You, if you listen closely, might feel that same yearning to be free from the compulsion of explanation. How many conversations have you left feeling empty because you poured out the truth and watched it fall to the ground, unheard? How many times have you watched your most honest words be twisted into shapes you did not recognize? There is a fatigue that grows from such moments, a fatigue that whispers, enough. But to cross into this sovereignty, you must endure the trial of misinterpretation without retaliation. You must face the ache of being unseen and let it wash through you without scrambling to correct it. In that ache, a new muscle forms, the muscle of standing whole in your own perception, even if it is the only perception that remains. This is the quiet revolution of the soul. It is not glamorous. There are no cheers when you choose silence over explanation, no applause when you walk away from a fight that once would have consumed you. In fact, there may be ridicule. There may be those who see your calm as weakness, who mock your refusal to wrestle in the mud. Let them. For every moment you resist the pull to justify yourself, you weave another thread into the unbreakable fabric of your being. And here is the deepest irony. When the need to be understood dies, the man finally becomes truly knowable, but only to those who approach without agenda. To these rare few, his stillness speaks louder than any defense could. They see the contours of his soul, not because he has drawn them in words, but because he has lived them in presence. The rest will tell their stories about him. They will write him into the roles they need him to play in their minds: the villain, the mystery, the fool, the hero. He will let them. For in the architecture of his inner world, their stories hold no jurisdiction. He walks his corridors alone, not in loneliness, but in ownership. Every brick has been laid by his own hand. Every door opens only by his choice. And in that space, he finds a truth that no misunderstanding can touch. The self that needs no audience is indestructible. There comes a point when the noise of the world no longer penetrates, not because the ears are closed, but because the heart no longer bends toward every passing voice. The man who has outgrown the need to be understood has crossed this threshold. He hears the praise, and he hears the blame, and both dissolve into the same quiet air. Neither lifts him, neither wounds him. They are simply weather patterns, momentary shifts in the atmosphere, while he remains the mountain. Such a man has learned the futility of asking the blind to describe the sun. It is not contempt, it is clarity. The blind may feel its warmth, may even describe the sensation with beauty, but they cannot be forced into sight. And so he does not waste his life demanding that others see him as he is. Instead, he lives in alignment with his own principles, knowing that this alone is the highest form of self-respect. In this space, he becomes uncatchable. Those who once sought to manipulate him by misreading his intent find nothing to hold on to. Their hooks pass through him like hands grasping at water. This is not because he has become slippery or evasive. It is because he has removed the very places where hooks could take hold. His sense of self no longer lives in their interpretation, and so it cannot be captured. Jung would call this individuation, the long and often painful process by which a person becomes whole within themselves, no longer fractured by the demand to fit into the molds offered by others. In individuation, the man confronts not only his desire to be understood, but the darker truth beneath it, the fear that without understanding, he will be unloved. This fear is ancient. It is the wound carried from childhood, when love often came in exchange for being agreeable, comprehensible, pleasing. To outgrow this fear is to reclaim the original self, untethered from the bargain. It is here that Stoic philosophy meets depth psychology. Epictetus taught that what disturbs a man is not events themselves, but his opinion about them. Likewise, what tormented this man was never truly the misunderstanding of others. It was his own belief that such misunderstanding could diminish his worth. When that belief dissolves, the torment ends. Yet this ending is not without its costs. Some relationships will wither, not from malice, but from lack of the old currency. Those who once bonded through constant explanation and emotional negotiation will find themselves adrift. Conversations grow shorter, lighter on drama, heavier on silence. The man does not withdraw love, but he no longer feeds the need for constant reassurance. And for some, that absence will feel like abandonment. Here lies the paradox. In freeing himself from the need to be understood, he invites others to do the same. But most will not accept the invitation, for it requires a radical self-trust they have not yet cultivated. They would rather live in the familiar prison of misinterpretation than face the terrifying freedom of no longer depending on it. This man, however, walks on. He no longer carries the weight of convincing anyone to join him. His path is not a sales pitch. It is a direction, and like all true directions, it can be seen only by those who have eyes to see. There is a purity to his silence now. It is not the silence of evasion or the coldness of withdrawal. It is the silence of someone who knows that words are powerless, where readiness is absent. He will speak when speaking is needed, and when it is not, he will let the moment stand unadorned. In this, he becomes almost monastic, even in the midst of the crowd. If you have ever stood in the presence of such a man, you will know it. You will feel a strange mix of comfort and discomfort. Comfort in the stability of his energy. Discomfort in the mirror he holds up to your own dependence on being seen. His way of being asks without asking. Could you remain whole if no one understood you? Could you keep walking if every voice misnamed you? Could you love without being acknowledged for it? Few can answer yes without hesitation, but those who can become like him. Not cold, not closed, simply free. Freedom, when it comes, does not arrive as a blinding revelation, but as a quiet absence. The absence of urgency, the absence of pleading, the absence of explaining oneself into exhaustion. It slips in like dawn through an open window, unnoticed until the room is already filled with light. The man who has outgrown the need to be understood wakes one day to find that the battles he once fought in the theater of other people's minds no longer interest him. The stage is still there, the actors still performing, but he has left the audience and stepped into the open air. It is not that misunderstandings cease. They do not. They flow around him constantly, as they always have. The difference is that he no longer enters their current. Where before he might have chased after each distortion, desperate to set the record straight, now he lets them drift away. He understands that chasing every misinterpretation is like trying to cup water in his hands. It leaks away faster than it can be held, leaving him empty. Here, the teachings of Marcus Aurelius become living flesh. If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them. The man has reworked his judgments. A false story told about him is not an attack. It is a reflection of the storyteller's inner landscape. A lack of understanding is not a condemnation. It is simply a place where paths do not meet. There is a peculiar strength in this acceptance. It is not resignation. Resignation suggests defeat. But this is victory, a victory that does not need to be celebrated, only lived. By no longer requiring others to carry the same map of reality that he does, he frees himself to walk unhindered. And with this freedom comes an unshakable presence. Those who encounter him may not understand him, but they cannot deny the solidity of his being. In Jungian terms, he has moved from the persona, the mask constructed for social approval, into the authenticity of the self. The persona always longs to be validated. The self simply exists, requiring nothing from the crowd. When a man steps into the self, the old reflexes of self-defense dissolve. The barbed retort, the desperate clarification, the endless preoccupation with what they think, all fade, leaving only the clarity of his own inner compass. Some will test this, trying to provoke him into the old games. They will speak in half-truths, bait him with insinuations, frame his actions in false light. Once, this would have been enough to pull him into the arena, blood boiling for vindication. Now, it draws nothing from him. Not because he is indifferent, but because his allegiance is no longer to perception. It is to principle. And a principle does not rise or fall on the approval of an audience. This detachment unnerves those still entangled in the web of mutual validation. They may call him cold, claim he has changed, accuse him of arrogance. But he knows that what they call arrogance is often simply sovereignty. A sovereign man belongs first to himself, and this belonging is threatening to those who rely on others for their sense of place in the world. And yet, this transformation is not selfishness. It is the opposite. Without the need to be understood, his love becomes cleaner, more unconditional. He no longer offers affection as a transaction, expecting to be mirrored in return. His love is a gift that expects nothing back, not because he does not value reciprocity, but because he no longer withholds himself when it is absent. He knows the worth of his giving is not measured by how it is received. If you stand close to such a man, you will sense the paradox. He is deeply engaged with life, yet profoundly untouched by it. He listens fully, yet remains unshaken by misunderstanding. He loves fiercely, yet without the chains of expectation. His presence feels both like an anchor and a challenge. An anchor for those weary of the storms of opinion, a challenge for those still ruled by them. And in his calm, a question lingers in the air like smoke. What would your life look like if you no longer needed anyone to understand you? How much energy would return to you? How much of your true self would emerge from hiding? At first, the answer to those questions will frighten you. To imagine a life free from the need to be understood is to strip away one of the most familiar currencies of human exchange. You begin to see how many of your choices, words, even small gestures, have been shaped by this need to clarify, to explain, to persuade others into alignment with your truth. Without it, who would you be? Without it, what mask would fall? The man who has crossed this threshold knows you would be more yourself than you have ever been, but he also knows the price. In relinquishing the need to be understood, you must accept being misread. You must accept that your silence will sometimes be filled by others, with their own shadows, their own fears, their own projections. You must watch as they construct a version of you that bears only a faint resemblance to the reality you live, and you must not rush to tear it down. This is not easy. It requires a surrender that feels, at first, like abandonment of self. But in time, you see it is the opposite. By not fighting every misinterpretation, you preserve your energy for what truly matters. You discover that truth does not need you to defend it at every turn. It stands on its own, whether acknowledged or ignored. Here lies the quiet elegance of Stoicism, woven into the depth psychology of individuation. A man's task is not to make himself legible to everyone. It is to remain aligned with what is just, right, and true, regardless of how it is read. The philosopher does not cry out to be understood. He lives in such a way that understanding is optional, irrelevant to his integrity. And so, the man becomes deliberate in all things. His speech is precise, not because he fears being misunderstood, but because his words are no longer reactive. His actions are steady, not because he seeks approval, but because he is guided by an internal law. He does not need to broadcast his values. They are written in the unshakable patterns of his living. Jung might say that such a man has integrated the animus and anima, the masculine drive for action and the feminine capacity for receptivity, into a unified field. He can hold contradiction without collapse, knowing that to be misunderstood does not make him false, and to be understood does not make him true. This is the alchemy of maturity, to stand in the center of one's being without leaning on the crutch of perception. Those around him will feel it, in his presence. The compulsion to perform begins to fade. There is no unspoken pressure to explain oneself, no subtle bargaining for approval. He offers the space to be, without negotiation. And yet, for those who still crave the friction of constant justification, his stillness can feel unbearable. Without a place to hook their narratives, they may accuse him of detachment, even cruelty. But the truth is simpler. He is no longer in the business of being consumed. He has learned that when a man spends his life trying to be understood, he risks being eaten alive by the appetites of others. The appetite for certainty, for reassurance, for the comfort of seeing the world only as they wish to see it. He has stepped away from that banquet, choosing instead the nourishment of his own clarity. From this place, his love changes shape. It is no longer a seeking love, hungry for recognition. It is a sovereign love, whole in itself. It does not diminish when unseen, nor swell when praised. It simply moves outward, unbound by the economy of validation. And as his love changes, so too does his power. It is not the loud, performative power that needs to be displayed to be real. It is the quiet authority of one who belongs to himself, utterly and without condition. Those who meet him may never fully understand him, but they will feel the weight of his presence, an unspoken knowing that here stands a man who cannot be bought, bent, or broken by the shifting tides of opinion. He does not ask you to follow him. He does not ask you to agree. But if you linger near him long enough, you may find your own need to be understood beginning to loosen, like a knot slowly untying in the dark. And when that knot begins to loosen, something else stirs, an ancient memory buried under years of social conditioning. It is the memory of moving through the world without constantly turning your head to see if anyone is watching, without rehearsing the angles of yourself you think will be most easily received. It is the memory of existing for the sake of existing, not for the sake of being translated. The man who has reached this place carries that memory, not as nostalgia, but as a living practice. He no longer seeks to make himself plain to every eye. He accepts that some will mistake his silence for disinterest, his composure for passivity, his boundaries for walls, and yet he does not flinch. For the moment he begins bending to correct every false reading, he steps back into the cage he has spent years breaking open. In Jung's terms, this is the emergence of the fully realized self, an inner state where the ego no longer acts as a desperate gatekeeper, chasing approval or bracing against disapproval. The self moves with a different rhythm, guided by a deeper alignment than any external validation could provide. It is the rhythm Marcus Aurelius spoke to when he wrote, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it." And yet, this stillness is not stagnation. The man is alive, deeply alive, more so than when he was endlessly chasing understanding. For in releasing that chase, he has freed his mind to engage in creation, exploration, and quiet joy. His conversations are lighter now, not because they lack depth, but because they are free from the hidden burden of persuasion. He listens not to respond, but to truly hear. He speaks not to convince, but to offer what feels worth saying. In relationships, this change is seismic. Those who depended on his constant explanations as a kind of emotional security will find themselves unsettled. Without the familiar rituals of clarification, they are left with their own interpretations and must face whether those interpretations are truly his responsibility to manage. Many will resist this, perhaps even withdraw, unable to bear the shift. But those who remain will meet him in a deeper space, where connection is built not on endless translation, but on the rare acceptance of what simply is. In the modern psychological sense, he has stepped out of the codependent loop. Where once he felt responsible for managing how others felt about him, now he recognizes that such management is both impossible and dishonest. Impossible, because no two people will ever see him in the same way. Dishonest, because altering himself for the sake of perception requires a betrayal of what is most essential in him. He is no longer afraid of that betrayal from others either. To be misread, mischaracterized, even maligned, these are no longer threats. They are simply proofs that he has chosen to live in a way that cannot be universally contained. He knows that living honestly will sometimes make him unrecognizable to those who rely on familiar illusions. And rather than mourning that, he wears it as an unspoken mark of freedom. In this way, his life becomes quieter but richer. The noise of constant self-explanation fades, replaced by the steady hum of an inner life that is no longer on display. His days are spent in pursuits that matter to him alone, crafting, building, learning, or simply being, without the need to broadcast them for legitimacy. And because he does not waste energy on the theater of being understood, his presence, when given, is fuller, more potent. To stand beside such a man is to sense the ground beneath you steady, not because he will explain himself into your comfort, but because he will not abandon himself to meet you there. His steadiness invites you to find your own, if you are willing, and if you are not, if you still crave the assurances and translations he has set down, you will feel the quiet ache of being unable to pull him back into the performance. For the man who no longer needs to be understood cannot be made to dance for comprehension. He has outgrown it. By the time a man reaches this point, his detachment from the need to be understood is not a posture he adopts. It is the marrow of his being. There is no conscious performance in it, no hidden hope that others will notice his restraint and reward him for it. The need for reward has dissolved along with the need for recognition. He simply walks his path, and the world may follow, parallel, or turn away entirely. It changes nothing. In the early stages of this transformation, there was effort, a constant reminding of himself not to engage in the old reflexes, not to rush into explanations, not to take the bait when misunderstood. Now there is no such effort. The reflex is gone, replaced by an unforced stillness. This is the deep current of sovereignty, the ability to remain oneself without the constant work of defending that self. Marcus Aurelius hinted at this truth when he wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. For I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed." Notice what is missing. Any mention of needing others to see him clearly before he can act justly. His openness to correction exists alongside his indifference to misunderstanding. That is the paradox. A man can be receptive to truth without being tethered to perception. From the outside, such a man can appear untouchable, even aloof. Those who measure worth by visibility cannot fathom a life lived beyond their gaze. They may interpret his lack of need as a lack of care, not understanding that his love is now given without condition. His care is not transactional. It does not ebb and flow with their comprehension. Jung might describe this as the archetype of the wise elder, not defined by age, but by integration. The wise elder sees without demanding to be seen. He knows that the work of the soul is not to be understood by the collective, but to embody its truth so fully that understanding becomes unnecessary. In him, the ego has ceased its endless negotiations with the outer world. It has taken its rightful place as servant to the self. This internal reordering brings with it a deep economy of energy. No longer is his mind consumed by imaginary debates or rehearsed defenses. He spends no sleepless nights wondering how to phrase his truth so that others will finally get it. That freed energy flows instead into action, into creation, into silent contemplation. He has discovered the profound productivity that comes when one's spirit is no longer a public relations campaign. His relationships change accordingly. Where once he might have clung to those who constantly misread him, hoping for eventual clarity, he now allows them to drift away if they must. This is not coldness, it is alignment. He understands that true connection cannot be built on the scaffolding of constant justification. If the bond requires him to endlessly prove his intentions, then it is not a bond worth preserving. This shift can be jarring to those around him. The man they once knew, the one always ready to explain, to soothe, to persuade, has been replaced by someone who offers no such performance. Some will accuse him of shutting down, of becoming unreachable, and in a sense, they are right. He has become unreachable to those who demand access to him through the narrow gate of their own understanding. But to those willing to meet him in the open field of mutual respect, he is more reachable than ever. The freedom here is immense. To act without the burden of universal comprehension is to move with a kind of speed and precision unknown to those still dragging the weight of constant approval seeking. He no longer stops at every mile to ask the crowd if he is still on the right path. He knows the path because it is carved into his bones. And as he walks, a clarity settles over his life. Misunderstanding is not an obstacle to living well. It is simply part of the weather, a condition to be met, not fixed. Just as the Stoics taught to meet cold with warmth, hunger with discipline, and pain with resilience, he meets misunderstanding with quiet acceptance. This is why, in the end, the man who outgrows the need to be understood is not harder to know. He is easier, but only for those who no longer need him to perform the dance of explanation. To them, he is an open landscape. To everyone else, he remains a mystery, and he is perfectly at peace with that.